recording. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to share my screen. And okay, everybody sees that?
Yeah.
I sent this out earlier, but here we have it nonetheless. Again, I'm still trying to figure out there's all kinds of shtick, but to make the screen and to see people at the same time, it's not the easiest thing in the world. Okay, here we go. Parshas Bo. Parshas Bo. This is the Exodus Parsha. I know everybody thinks that B'Shalach is the Exodus Parsha, but it's actually this Parsha. There's a lot to unpack here. I'm going to share with you again. This is a lot of this is based on Rabbi Foreman's teaching, which is, again, phenomenal. The next volume has come out of his work. I would highly recommend it. If you're looking for some good Shabbos study or weekday study or summer reading or whatever it is you want to do, it's really, really quite good. Not that he needs my approbation, but and I actually took one of his charts, which I'll show you in a second. So, Vayisa ha'am es b'tzeko terem yachmatz. Okay, the people took their dough before it was leavened. Misharosam tzruos b'sim losam al shichmam. Their kneading bowls wrapped in their cloaks on their shoulders. I understand we're jumping in the middle of a paragraph here, but this is the chapter 12 of the Exodus. Beginning of chapter 12 is HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, which we read on Parshas HaChodesh. It's the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people in the Torah of Rosh Chodesh, okay? But here now they're starting to leave. So we always have this image of, the Jewish people are leaving and they're grabbing and they're hurrying. And have you ever had to leave somewhere in a hurry? Have you ever had to go and just grab stuff?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's like my kids every single morning going to school. Okay. And then I have one kid who drives them and they're supposed to be in school by 8:10 and it's 8:15 and she's still in bed, but that's a whole other question. But then it's a frantic rush of I gotta take my bag, take this. So here's they're grabbing the dough, but it's not yet, it wasn't leavened, and the kneading bowls are wrapped in their cloaks on their shoulders. I mean, who puts a kneading bowl in your cloak on your shoulder? And there's this, by the way, there's this custom that people have, and it's actually brought down in the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. We talk about not having time to bake the bread. And there's some that say that they had, because the kneading bowls were on their shoulders, that the sun somehow half baked their bread and made matzah. We've heard this, right? I don't sound give me a thumbs up. I'm not from outer space, right? Okay.
Yes.
So there is, and that's mentioned in the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. There is a custom. Maybe Miriam Cohen can speak to this. Miriam Schwartz Cohen. Why Miriam? About, I don't know. Did you have this in your house? A Sephardic custom to walk around with a matzah on your shoulder on Pesach?
My dad puts it over his head, he carries it over his head.
Miriam's father, by the way, is a well-known rabbinic figure. He's been a rabbi in many places. He's a very, very cool story, Rabbi Cohen. And he's got another name, a Sephardic cool name also. But but that's, you see that. So people on their head, or some people would they would actually recreate the Exodus, but doing you would, right? So, okay, fine. And that's based on this pasuk here. Okay. And then Uvnei Yisrael asu k'devar Moshe vayishalu mitzrayim klei chesed klei zav usmalos. Then the Israelites, they did what Moshe had commanded, and they borrowed, okay, notice the air quotes, borrowed from the Egyptians objects of silver and gold and clothing, okay? It's a term that we use, we use it all the time, terribly, right? Does somebody, come into your office and say, can I borrow a piece of paper? Borrow implies that you're going to pay it back, you're going to give it back. Or can I borrow a tissue? Are you going to give me a tissue bag, or hopefully a clean one? When you're so this is where it comes from. This borrow, and we're told we know in the Chumash what it means. We're going to come back to this. And the Lord had disposed the Egyptians favorably toward the people, and they let them have their requests. So they wiped them out. They cleaned them out. And by the way, as much loot as they got now, it's not even close to what they got. It says the Bizas Hayom, what they got at the sea, which we'll see next week's parsha. That's where they really, really cleaned up. Okay, so that's the end of that parsha. That's the pay. It means as a parsha. Vayisu b'nei Yisrael me ra'am se sukosa kashesh meos elaf ragli hagavarim levad mitaf. the Israelites, they went from Ramses to Sukkoth, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children. So let's just think about that for a second. 600,000 men, we say, is the age of, let's say, 20 to 60. You take children, you take elderly, you take the female population. That's a lot of people. That's why we put the number at around 3 million. 3 million people, okay? Just imagine 3 million Jews. Now, by the way, you can ask yourself, what's the largest? We've done this exercise before. It's always worth repeating. What's the largest gathering you've ever attended? So for me, it was twice probably when we had marches in Washington. One was like the Intifada March, but one was in 1986, a march for Soviet Jewry in Washington. And there they estimated probably about 600,000 people, okay? So, and that was a lot of people. And that's just six. So if you can imagine 3 million and above that 3 million Jews, like they were all going in the same direction, that's impossible. Like this, I mean, what a balagan. We can't get 10 Jews to agree on anything. You think like 3 million Jews are going to go the same direction. And like, you just think logistically about how it worked in the Midbar and how did they get instructions and how did they listen to Moshe, without a microphone. Really, really, really interesting things to think about. But that's one of those things where you have to have faith, because if you start thinking about facts and things like that in the Torah, it'll just drive you crazy. Okay, so not only that, v'gam erev rav Allah itam v'tzona bakar miknei kaved me'od, and also the mixed multitude, the erev rav. We're not gonna discuss this in detail, but there's always like the troublemakers that get mixed in. Okay, the erev rav who went, and a lot of livestock and flocks and herds. Okay, sometimes you have large gatherings, and then there are a few bad actor individuals involved in those large gatherings, which taint the entire large gathering. But I'm not talking about anything in particular, but whatever. Vayofu es habatzek asher hotziu mi Mitzrayim ugos matzos kilo chametz ki gorshu mi Mitzrayim velo yachlu lehisma meya v'gam tzeda lo asu lahem. Here we go. They baked unleavened cakes of the dough that they had taken out of Egypt because it wasn't leavened, since they had been driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. So the picture that we get is that, they didn't have time to make, challah, sourdough bread. They didn't have time. Didn't have time with the starters and you name them and you talk to them nicely. We learned over COVID about sourdough bread. I'm sure a lot of people took that on. And we had names for the starters, and we actually, we like had competitions. The kids named them after their parents, which is us. So, whose bread would do better. And it's really phenomenal. And you have to but they didn't have time for it. It's a labor of love. No, it was like on their shoulders and their backpack, whatever it was. And then they just they had to make matzahs. It's unleavened cakes. Unleavened cakes, right? Because it uses the word batsek or ugot, which are some sort of cakes. Now, in all likelihood, the matzah. Now, again, I'm gonna say something that's probably not so popular, but the matzah that we eat today is probably not the matzah they had in Egypt. Okay.
I think there are some Sfardim that have like this soft matzah.
Yeah, the Temani, I think community, they have it. It's like lafa.
Yeah.
Lafa. Now, by the way, I could deal with lafa on Pesach. All we need is get rid of this kidney stuff and a little bit of hummus, tahina. I'm good, right? Think about what a difference it would make if we had lafa. Okay, you'd be making wraps all the time. A little lafa with avocado. It would be nice. Instead, it's we spend 18 hours trying to get some Breakstone's butter on a piece of matzah without breaking it into 17 pieces. And then, of course, when we bite into the matzah, it's so good this year. The matzah, it's the same matzah as last year. It actually is the same matzah from last year. Okay, so don't tell me the good this year. Okay, so they couldn't delay. In other words, if they couldn't stay a minute, and we know this imagery that, they were down the lowest level of impurity, and if they would have stayed a second longer, they wouldn't have made it, all these things. Okay. And then we have this great two psukim here. Umoshav b'nei Yisrael asher yashvu b'Mitzrayim 30 shana v'arba me'el shana. The length of time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. Vahi miketz 30 shana v'arba me'el shana. Vahi be'etzem hayam hazeh yatzu kol tzivos Hashem me'eretz Mitzrayim. At the end of 430th year, to the very day, Etzem Hayom Hazeh, in the middle of the day, all the ranks of Hashem, they departed from the land of Egypt. Now, you could spend a year in a Yovel trying to figure out this calculation of 430 years. Rashi, if you want to see one of the great Rashis in Chumash, it's also Rashi in the Gemara. Rashi details how we figure out 400 years and why 430. And anything that you try to figure out, given what the Chazal teach us, you're going to come into some sort of roadblock. It's just one of those things where you try to it's another thing, you talk about 3 million people. When you try to figure out years in Chumash and timelines, it could get very, very hairy. So, okay, that's that. All right. So this is the passage I want to study. Okay. Now, here's the key word right here. It says v'lo yachlu lehismameya. Now, when you see the word ismameya, what do you think of right away?
Eliyahu.
Yeah. Why? Elaborate on that.
Also, if Humit Mamea and the Chakelo.
Right. So Eliyahu, Mashiach, like all, it's an Animamin.
Yeah.
No, do we have to sing it? Are we good?
Good.
No? V'afal pisha ismameya in kol chakel. All right. Afal pisha even kol chakelo. I am waiting, but let's take it from a biblical point of view. Okay. We always try to look and try to figure out, it's not because it's not a common word, by the way. Now, anybody who's proclivity towards laning or Balkriya or even syntax in the Chumash, the word Vayismameya, one of the first times it appears is in Parashas Vayera. And we know this because it's the first of 4 shalshelas notes that we have in the entire Chumash. There are only 4 times. 3 of them are in Bereshis. Vayismama, that they delayed Lot leaving Sodom, etc. But we actually have one that was a little bit more recent, and we're going to see, is there a connection between these 2 stories? Now, just because you have 2 words, even 2 unusual words that are similar in 2 locations, it does not necessarily mean that they're connected. So let's look at the next section. Here we have Bereshis. Vayomer Yisrael, this goes back to the story in Miketz. Just to refresh your memory, since we've already put all the Bereshis books away. I know that Merit has already put all the Bereshis books away, and he's taken out all the Shmos books. He's getting ready to take out the Haggadahs. I mean, it's like we're getting ready. It's Purim, by the way. By the way, if anybody in this group, I have copies that I can give you as like a wonderful gift for our class. If anybody would like a copy of Erica Brown's book on Esther to prepare for Purim, please let me know and I will get you a copy. I will get it to you. So just email me and put it in the email chat. Carol, I don't know if I could get it to you that easily. I could scan every page maybe and send it, but then she loses out on the 8 cents that she makes per book. And by the way, Erica had a grandson this week.
That's okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so Joseph, Egypt, brothers hate him. He's the viceroy. They come down during famine. He plays games with them. They go back and they have to say, he says, don't come back unless you bring Binyamin. Okay. Finally gets to a point where the brothers are back with Yaakov and the famine is getting too strong. And Yehuda steps up and he says to his father, I'm going to paraphrase, we'll see the Pesukim in a second. And he says, Dad, this is enough already. We got to go. We got to do something. So Vayomer Yisrael, Lama hareyosim li lahagil ish ha'od lachem ach. So this is all about Binyamin. And Yaakov says to the brothers, but really to Yehuda, and he says, why did you have to, why do you do me like that? Why do you have to be so, Lama harayosali? We see that phrase a few times. Moshe uses it to God. Why do you do such evil to me? Lahagid ish, to tell that guy, meaning not, again, at this point, they don't know that it's Yosef, but why would you tell that person that you have another brother to put us into this mix? Vayomeru, and they all said, Sha'al ha'ish lanu ulam alatenu le'mor, hor avichem chay ha'ish lachem ach, vanaged lo al piyat dvarim ha'ileh, hayadone da ki amar haridu as achichem. They said, but the man, he kept asking about us and our family. He was prying, he was probing, he had some sort of mind games he's playing on us. Is your father still alive? Do you have another brother? And we answered accordingly. How are we going to know that he's going to say, oh, now bring your brother here? Vayomer Yehuda el Yisrael aviv shilcha hanar iti v'nakuma v'nei lecha v'nechye v'lo namus gam anachnu gam ata gam tapein. Yehuda then steps up. Again, this is Yehuda's trying to be take his leadership position. Okay, this is the formation of Yehuda's character. And Yehuda says to his father, again, Ruvain had tried, Ruvain failed. Shimon, not there. Levi doesn't say much. Yehuda says to Yisrael, here what we're going to do. Send the boy. I'll take care of him. We're going to be on our way. So we have to live. We don't want to die. The famine is terrible. You, me, the kids, everyone, we all have to live. And then here he has this wonderful line. He says, Anochi ervenu miyadi tevakshenu. I Anochi Arvenu. He says it means I will be an Arev. An Arev is a guarantor. Anochi Arvenu miyadi tevakshenu. I will be the guarantor for him. You may hold me responsible. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, I will stand guilty before you forever. I'll tell you an interesting story about this pasuk. Anochi Arvenu miyadi tevakshenu. Okay, so we have Carol, you all know Carol, but Carol's sister is on, but she's like very modest, so she won't go on camera. Minna Greenbaum. Minna's son, Carol's nephew, Daniel. He's a few years younger than I am, but I was learning with him. Bechavrusa, I was helping him with his studies since he was probably, I don't know, 5th, 6th grade when I was in yeshiva in Muncie. And when it came time for his bar mitzvah, which is the same bar mitzvah parsha as mine, Vayigash, and we spent months and months working on a bar mitzvah pshetel based on this pasuk of Anochi Erevenu Miyadi Tevakshenu, about the concept of an Orev, about a guarantor in halacha, about who's responsible if one defaults, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And God bless it. And then we had this beautiful concept that was written down. There was a whole lumdaship shot. And Daniel's father, Dr. Stanley Greenbaum, he didn't love it. So he decided to switch and he completely changed it like the day before the bar mitzvah. But it was fine. So we still, Buddy and I, Daniel and I, we still talk about it. We learn it together. But that's what I think of when I see this pasuk. Anochi Arvenu miyadi tevakshenu. Look at the last pasuk. Kilulei hismahamanu ki ato shavnu zeh pa'amayim. We could have been there and back twice if we had not dawdled. That's the Sefaria translation, okay? So he's like, Tati, Abba, like we sit here talking and do it. Like, come on, hasn't this happened, especially when the family has to go somewhere and they're trying to you spend more time figuring out like who's going to sit where, which car are we going to take, what route are we going to go, who's going for, who's taking this bag, who's doing it. And we're like, oh my gosh, we could have been there and back already, like by now. Like we spent so much time patching around with nonsense. So he's like, Dad, we could have gone back and forth to Egypt. Now, this is a pasuk that's often glossed over. But he says, we could have been back and forth to Egypt twice if we didn't wait this long. Dad, what are you holding out for? Now, ultimately what happens, of course, we know that Yaakov relents and he goes down, and the rest of the story we'll see. We know what happens. They go down, and they have the reuniting of the brothers, and Yosef tells them his true identity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so, but look at the last pasuk. We have the word, kilulei hismahamanu. If we had not dawdled, had we not waited around, we could have been back and forth already twice. So, here is where Rabbi Foreman does his genius. He goes to work, and this is really, really exciting. Now, you would say if I have two words, two different passages that have hismahamanu, that have the word hismameya, okay, it's nice, it's cute, but we have to find more than that. And boy, does he find more than that. So I'm going to, instead of doing it piece by piece, I'm going to go to his final chart here and look at this chart right here, okay? Here we go. Here we have side by side, we have the people of Israel leaving Egypt, and Yehuda speaks with Jacob. Okay, so here we go. The first thing that we have, here we have Lehismameya, but when Yaakov and Yehuda are having their conversation, or the kids, they say, Ki sha'ol sha'al ha'ish lanu. Okay, now what does it mean when the Torah uses a double language? What does that usually mean?
Like emphasis a lot?
Correct. So it's usually an emphasis that or he's insistent. And here it probably means that, he like persistently asked us. he like badgered us. Sha'ol, 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 sha'al. There's an emphasis. In other words, like we couldn't get out of it as much as we tried to evade the question. And you know that sometimes when like you see that like with probing reporters, you ever see probing reporters when they have to ask a difficult question and then the interviewee doesn't want to answer the question and he's evasive and then they kind of reframe it in a different way and at a certain point maybe they just give in and they sort of like give it up. But that's not. So here we have sha'ol sha'al, the double language, which, you know, it doesn't necessarily lend that much to the text, but it's there to show the emphasis. If you look, and again, these are color coded, which is beautiful. Also, you gotta like color coded. And then what do we have again? By the way, these similarities all occur in the same sequence, which is really interesting as well. So, and I'm going to ask you to figure out then what's the connection. Okay, I'm going to point out the similarities. You come up with the connection, and we'll talk about this. So, sha'ol sha'al, and then what do we have? We have two exact repetitions of the word of sha'ol sha'al in the left side on vayisha'alu mimitzrayim klei kesef, and then vayashilum. The Torah, now again, I understand it's different meaning, but that's why it's important to look at the text, to look at the language. Sha'ol sha'al could mean a lot of things, by the way, but in Yaakov's context, it means that they were saying, he kept asking. Here, vayisha'alu mimitzrayim klei kesef, vayashilum, they borrowed or they asked for it. Now, they didn't really ask for it, they took it. They took the items from the Egyptians and they fattened their pockets. But again, the fact that the Torah goes out of its way to write it twice, Vayishalu, that would have been enough. Then it says Hashem gave the favor of the eyes of the Egyptians and that Vayashilum. So two languages, again, it's for this emphasis, Sha'ol Sha'al Vayashilum. The next thing that we have is that normally when the Torah refers to children, what's a term that the Torah uses?
Tough.
Is what?
Tough.
Tough, really?
Yeah.
So when you would say, like, if you're talking about, you know, you're speaking to your children,
Banecha.
right? You would say, "Oh no," you'd say to Merit, let's go pack the car, and please make sure you have all the taf with you, okay? And he'll say to you, "Tough luck."
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be here all week.
Banim.
Right? You say Yiladim, Banim, right? You wouldn't know who uses the word tough. Very rarely does the Chumash use the word tough, and yet here what happens? Vayomer Yehuda El Yisrael Aviv Shilcha Hana Ariti V'Nakumu Lechem Nechlenemus Gam Anachnu Gam Ata Gam Tapenu. And what happens here? When they leave all the people Levad, not including Taf. So we have again similarity number 2, or really would say number 3 if we're counting this amount. But let's do this number. Similarity number 2. Exactly 2 words later in each section. Anochi ervenu v'gam erev rav. You have these 2 words again, different. Now, you could say that they're mixed. What would be a similarity if erev rav means the mixed multitude? Erev is like the concept of an eruv, by the way. What is it? So like an eruv. What is an eruv? An eruv actually allows us to sort of combine or enclose 2 different domains. It mixes them together. Le'arev is to mix something together. So Anochi Ervenu, and Arev is different than Erev. Erev is to mix and the mixed multitude, but an Arev is related to this because he actually is a third party that mixes into this deal, into a union of 2 people. In order to make sure that it goes through, you have a third party that's a guarantor, and that's actually mixed in. That's the relationship of the word, Erev and Arev. So exactly 2 spaces later, mitaf, 2 words, Arev. Taf, Arev. Okay, next. This one is cool, actually. Okay, this is cool. Velo yachlu. Let's see if anybody can figure this one out. See, the Egyptians threw them out because they didn't have time to delay. And here it says, Ki lulei hismamani, for had we not tarried. So what would you see as the connection between velo yachlu and ki lulei? Anybody who's good at word games would pick up on this right away. That doesn't mean that if you don't pick up on it, you're not good at word games. I don't mean
it's like the chaf yud is in the yach, the yud chaf, and then the lule is in the other letters.
So what Shelley is saying brilliantly is that it's an anagram.
Right. I couldn't think of the word.
Right. It's an anagram. It's exactly the same letters. velo yachlu. See, look at it. It's like velo. It's like if I like take ki, right, and then it's lule, ki lule.
Right.
Or have right. It's very it's cool. Okay, but what actually is but what do the phrases mean? Okay, means that like kilo like kilule means had we not, and velo yachlu is we couldn't. So they kind of like mirror one another, those kind of phrases. And then, of course, we have the two words at the end, hismamano and lehismameya. Okay? Now, the question is before we get to the final piece, which is the last word here, what is the connection? If I were to ask you, can you this is where the work comes to make the connections or to establish a pattern. That's actually the easy part. You have to just be able to see it, which is why I say it all the time when we learn Chumash, when we learn Tanakh. You have to take a macro version, not just a micro version. It's very easy to look at one pasuk and to look at every single meforish on the pasuk. What does he say? What does he? But when you do that, you lose sight of the larger picture. I'll show you, for example. I'm not leaving. I'm coming back. Often when I do these types of teaching, I will use, when you have a mikros gedolos, there's something like only 2 psukim on a page. So I will often, let's say teaching, I'll use something like this, okay, which has so much on a page, which then gives you the ability to look. So like we came up with something a few weeks ago when we were looking at the word ma'uma. 6 times the word ma'uma appears in Bereshis, which means nothing or for anything. And by the way, if you can see my little flags here, also something I learned from Dr. Greenbaum is that you have 4 of them are here in the same area. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 like that. So that's why you have to take the macro view. So the macro view, we made the connection. What's the connection? And the connection is going to be in this last line. Had we not tarried, we would have been back twice already. Okay, so let's think out loud. Anybody want to contribute? Anybody want to say anything? By all means, this is the time. If you have any thoughts of like what could a possible connection be? Otherwise, I'm gonna have to call on Miriam Schwartz and she's gonna not be happy. She's already making a face of me. Okay. Well, let's look at it this way. What does Yehuda mean? When Yehuda's speaking sort of, and this is in the category of like careful what you say, or we say al tiftach peh Satan. What Yehuda's thinking, Dad, like we could have been back and forth twice already, right? I get it. Egypt is not that far from where they are. Remember, we looked at it when we talk about the Via Maris. If they were living in Hebron, let's say, certainly to go from Hebron, you hit down to the coast to Egypt, not that far of a trip, a couple of days. You go there, load up, come back. So we could have done this twice. They're waiting weeks and weeks. He's like, we could have been there twice. What happens? They go down to Egypt. They realize Yosef reveals himself because now that he meets Binyamin and with all the brothers, they bring him back safely, etc. He reveals his identity. Parshas Vayigash, there's a little back and forth there, but he reveals his identity. And then they have to go back and he says, but go back and bring my father. They all go back to get Yaakov. So that's round trip number 1, right? Yaakov goes down. This is again the middle of Parshas Vayigash. Yaakov goes down to Egypt with the family, and he goes to, they set up in Goshen a whole bit. He reunites, the whole family's together. When's the next time that the whole family goes up? In other words, to make that to complete that second round trip.
And he dies.
So that I knew you would say that, Vivian. Excellent. Because that's what I would say. You and I, we share a brain. You know that. So it's yes. The answer is yes, but it's not the whole family. If you look carefully in Parshas Vayechi, a number of family members were held back, probably for security reasons. If you see, and it's a fascinating study, which we've touched on in the past a little bit, but Yosef has to finesse that arrangement to get his father buried in the land of Canaan. Because after all, Yosef is the second in command of Egypt, and Yaakov has become very much a part of the society now. He's lived there for 17 years, whatever it was. And now Yosef has to say, oh yeah, by the way, we're not really part, and like, I gotta go and take my dad. If you notice and read the psukim carefully, he does not ask directly. He uses messengers. He's very diplomatic about it. He's political about it. And they don't, and to show that they're not gonna like bolt and leave town, because you can imagine, no matter how, and this is the lesson, by the way, no matter how much we think we fit in, we never fit in. Okay, no matter how you could be the vice president, it doesn't matter. You're still not one of them. And Yosef is aware of that. So they leave a number of the family, particularly the children. The children stay behind. So when's the next time that they all go back and complete this trip? It's right now in Parshas Bo. That's why the Torah says, "Umoshav b'nei Yisrael asher yashavu b'Mitzrayim." Okay. Look at the Shavnu Ze Pa'amayim. Where's the 2 times he says we could have returned twice by now? It doesn't come to fruition until our pasuk here. I know the color's not great because it's gray background, but look at the 2 green. Shavnu, 2 Shavnus. We could have had 2 returns by now. Umoshav b'nei Yisrael asher yashavu. It's an unbelievable play on words. And the dwelling, because if you were saying that the Jews stayed in Egypt for 430 years, you wouldn't write it like that. You would just say, Bnei Yisrael were in Egypt for 430 years. The dwelling that they dwelled in the place of Egypt was 430 years. Nobody writes like that. But again, it's a play on the words. It's drawing your attention back to this super connection between the story of Yaakov and Yehuda. Umoshav asher yashvu, meaning Umoshav b'nei Yisrael asher yashvu, and the dwelling that they dwelt. Now, obviously, these are 2 different words, right? Shavnu here means return. Yashvu means to dwell. And by the way, there's another, let's see if you can come up with this. There's one more meaning of the word, which certainly would play into this, which also has the same shoresh of shav. Anyone?
Return.
No, so that's this one. Shav Nuz Lepamayim. That's in Bereshis.
Sit.
Sit
Settle.
is what? What, Miriam? I heard you. Settle. So that's probably Umoshav Asher Yashvu. That's related to this. Not to do with returning or settling.
What about sit?
So that's settling and sitting as Yeshua Yeshavu. That's probably very similar. It's one of the only times that we have actually an American model automobile mentioned in the Torah. Right? Vayish bimenu Chevy.
Oh, I'm thinking Saab.
Saab is Swedish, first of all. Come on. By the way, I love Saab. Is one of the great all-time cars. I had the ignition in the middle of the car. Oh, beautiful. I had 2 Saabs. I love that car. They don't make it anymore. The word Chevy, what does Chevy mean? And I'm not talking about the Shaitel lady in Brooklyn, by the way.
To be a prisoner.
Prisoner. It's the same thing. Vayish bimenu Chevy. So it could be also Kishavnu Ze Pa'amayim. It's also a hint of the fact Umoshav b'nei Yisrael asher yashavu b'Mitzrayim. When they went to Egypt, they were prisoners. Now, I know it didn't start off that way. They went as guests of the king, and they had their own place. But ultimately, by the way, they were also prisoners then also, because they couldn't, where were they going? There was a famine in the world, and they're in essence stuck there. You could be free and be a prisoner. I think we could all relate to that over the last 11 months, right? You could do what? We have all kinds of freedom, but you can't go anywhere, right? Nebuch, there's so many people in our community that are suffering now because it's going to be Yeshiva week and they have nowhere to go. It's so terrible. We should say Tehillim. It's really tough. It's hard. It's very hard on us. But the people in Egypt, when they went down the first time, so putting it all together, okay. And this is the whole story of Yehuda coming full circle, okay. He says, look, we could have been back twice by now. And what is the Torah telling us? Oh, Yehuda, you have no idea what you're talking about. You think it's so easy to go back and forth to Mitzrayim? God has other plans. part of God's providence is that, you know what, we have a lot of things that have to happen. Yeah, you'll go back once, back and forth once. But when you go back then, you're not coming back for a long time. That's why the Torah has to be so deliberate about Umoshav Asher Yashvu was 430 years. 430 years from the time of Yaakov. That's what we have to count it. You figure out the years. And it was after 430 years. It's like after 430 years, that's when they went out of Mitzrayim. In other words, to complete this journey that Yehuda so flippantly discusses. Again, it's not careless on his part. He just doesn't know God's plan. And by the way, how did this all start? It all started with Yehuda. The brothers wanted to kill him. Reuven wants to save him. And Yehuda says, no, let's put him in a pit. Maybe we'll sell him. Whether he directly sold him, but he certainly was responsible for the sale of Yosef and not killing him. One brother who didn't look after another brother, a son of Leah didn't look after a son of Rachel. And then what happens at the end of the story? What's the ultimate roundabout here is? It's the son of Leah that defends the son of Rachel in Binyamin. And he brings them back and brings them together. And only then can we have them, the whole family reunited, and they can come up and they can really bring the story full circle and save the family. And by the way, when it says, and this is important, when it says that Yehuda decided to throw Yosef in a pit and they agreed, what's the first thing that they did afterwards? They ate. Right, but the pasuk says, "Vayeshevu le'echol lecha." They sat down. Another shavnu zeh pa'amayim, moshav yashvu, etc. So, I think that what we have to do here. So again, it's fascinating. You would take here two seemingly unrelated passages. Here we have a passage in our parsha, and we have another passage. But that's why it's so important to pay attention to the words, the sequence of the words. Now, just to have hismamanu and mismameya at the same time, that's not enough. That's not enough. You really need more to that. Oh, sometimes the Medrash will build those connections for you. But when you see the sequences in the Medrash, and then you look at the bigger picture, and you put it all together, and you see what's happening, then what happens? You come up with something really interesting. And that's why you have the beauty of like modern technology that can put it together for you with color coding. And you see it's like, oh, wow, look at this. Like when you see this, you can't deny the connection between these two episodes. So then here's where you can explore. Again, you can come up with your own theories. It's not a question of right or wrong. You can come up with your theories and say, I think this is the connection, or maybe we can enhance the connection, or maybe we could find other things that fit into this connection. And that's the beauty of how we learn Tanakh. And when you see it like this, it's like, oh, this is really something special. This is bringing two different parts of the story together, when in actuality, it's just one arc of one long story. Right? Because the whole point of Yehuda and Yosef and Yaakov, etc., and then getting down to Egypt and now finally coming out of Egypt. And then also you could track that, by the way, by looking at the Shvatim, by looking at the descendants of those things. Again, that's what I refer to in Nechama Price's new book about the tribes and tracking the activity of the tribes and the descendants of the tribes through the rest of Tanakh. That's an interesting thing. So that's what we have, what I wanted to share with you here for, I'm just going to do a full screen there. What I wanted to share with you for this, I see something is in the chat. Oh, Miriam had to leave early. Thank you. This is such a fascinating look at the actual psukim, which, we read them over and over and over again, but sometimes we read the same things over and over again. We kind of lose sight of what they actually really say. So when we put these two things and really helpful when you have it side by side, color coded in context like that, I find it to be super, super helpful. I'm not sure about next week, again, because my kids are all off. I'm going to see what I'm being told that I have to do while they're off. That's kind of how it works. But I'm taking votes on the beard. Shloshim is on Monday, so I'm taking votes on the beard. So if you have any specific, okay, Nancy's giving a no. And whatever you say is irrelevant, because whatever my wife tells me to do, that's what I'm going to do. But so far she said, I don't know, maybe.
I have a quick question, which is another class. It's not for today really, but maybe one day you'll address this in a different class. They were warned that they were going. They didn't really have to rush. You're told you're going to eat in your shoes, you're going to have to go quickly. it didn't come so suddenly.
Right. It is contradictory in that sense. That's an excellent question. Yeah, there we'd have to kind of like dig into the Mefarsha and see. But yeah, that's a good point. I will make note of that. So maybe Pesach.
Oh, maybe
Okay.
that's
Pesach. Certainly, let me get Pesach again. Yeah. So if anybody would like a copy of the book, please let me know. It's Purim is upon us. Today is the 6th day of Shvat, which means that Purim is coming, which means that you know what's coming after that, which means, woohoo. Anyway, let's, so if you want, I'm happy to get you a copy of the book. And it's fantastic, by the way. If you really want to start studying Megillas Esther, I would recommend reading the book. It's really phenomenal. And great. Everybody have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Rabbi.
Nice guy.